Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm LaShawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching.
All right. Good New Year to everybody. Happy 2026. I wrote my first, we actually had to write out 2026 yesterday. So that felt different and also exciting. And we decided today to talk about some well-defined plans in relationship to coaching, potentially goal setting, and just really shaping our new year moving forward. I know in the past, we always say this is something to start much sooner, typically in early fall, which we have and we have discussed on our podcast. And it is still something, though, that me personally, I am grappling with. It has plagued me because primarily the break was very full with family and, not having childcare with kids consistently. And so it was really hard for me this break to do both work and that. And so I struggled to kind of find my footing in terms of my work and kind of focus a little bit more on my kids. And now that we're heading into this new year with this new week, I feel a little bit at sea. I'm going to be honest here, at sea when it comes to my planning for this year, even looking back on what I had said I would accomplish for 2026. And I would be an ideal coaching client right now for a coach to help that individual find clarity, to help an individual find more meaning and purpose and intentionality in what they're moving forward with their time and what they're doing. So in today's episode, we're just going to discover and process and look into this idea of how do we create planning that works for us at the individual level while also being responsive to it. And then also getting support for that collaborative space when we feel a little bit lost or a little bit uncertain. So for me, this new year brings in that uncertain feeling in a way when it comes to moving forward with my own business and what that looks like and where I'm splitting my time between that, volunteering, and being the primary caretaker at home. So yeah, a lot to kind of consider at the personal level. And I think as we go through this, and even if we talk about it at the personal level, our hope is that both coaches and people who seek out coaching have some new tools and ideas for navigating this new year with intention.
Yeah, I love that you say navigating, because when I think about planning, especially personally and also as a coach, navigate is one of the 5 sage powers in positive intelligence coaching. And so that is what I was thinking about, Eryn, when you were talking. And of course, I often use nautical metaphors, nautical terms, navigating, finding that compass, your North Star, that kind of thing. And so when you were talking, I was thinking about how important it is to start with your values, like what really matters. When I am thinking about like making a plan for the new year or an event or vacation, for example, it helps me to clarify the purpose of it or what I want to get out of it. And so what it does is it helps me to kind of, going back to those nautical terms, is come up with the destination. I'm headed here. How do I get there? And charting that course, again, more nautical terms, but charting that course towards that destination. So if I look at 2026, one of the things that I really want to do for 2026 is make a more stable foundation for myself and my family. So in order to make a stable financial foundation, so just really wanting to have that emergency fund set up and ready to go. So I need to make choices in this new year that align with that desire to have a stable, a pretty good financial foundation for my family and myself. So that is really going to dictate the decisions that I make. Like, what am I going to do with my tax refund? What am I going to do, when it comes to our family trips and that kind of thing? Maybe we might make different decisions based on that desire to set aside some money, for like an emergency fund. That is one example that I have for, a solid, well-defined plan. And I think what is needed for me and perhaps for people who think like me, not everybody does, different people are wired differently and have different priorities. But I find that clarifying the goal, clarifying the destination, clarifying what you want to see, how you want to feel in 2026, or how you want to feel, or what you want to experience on that vacation or in this event. Like, what are you wanting people to experience, or what do you want to walk away with when this is done? Really helps clarify and create a plan that's more meaningful and has more direction. What are your thoughts, Eryn?
I was just taking notes on a lot of what you said for my my own purpose moving forward in the new year, and my intention setting and my plans to make those come to fruition. I'm feeling a little bit panicked about this topic because I was trying to process it in my own mind and couldn't get any movement with it. And I tried to journal a little bit and couldn't get any movement with that. However, just having a thought partner today and hearing you talk about your process and how navigation can be somewhat of a metaphor for this year, to use that to know what destination you're headed to and then how to get there. I think that helped me start to clarify in my own mind a few of my more pressing priorities for early this month, and then also the longer term prioritization that I want to make happen. And you were speaking about health, and I think health is so foundational. How do we want to feel? How do we want to show up in the world? That all relates to our health and how well we can take care of that. And I last year tried to put on my calendar where I would go to the rec center at one point during the day, like three times a week, maybe twice a week. And I didn't follow through with that very well until I signed up for the weights class at the rec center, where I had to go and show up for someone other than myself. So knowing that lesson from last year and realizing that I want to improve upon that part of my wellness, I think I might have to go back to the drawing board and sign up for something that exists. So I have to show up to it, and I can't really schedule meetings on top of it, because what was happening is I would schedule work meetings on top of where I had blocked out my calendar for my workout. And usually when I block out things on my calendar, they stick. I don't have any issue. I don't schedule over them. I know that's what my schedule will look like. But when it comes to that piece of my health, that is the first thing that gets scheduled over. And then once it starts to get scheduled over, I completely start to lose the motivation. And then I may not even schedule over, I just won't go anymore. And so I think for my health, I need to navigate the obstacles a little bit better, and I need to take the lessons from last year and apply them to this year to create something a little bit more sustainable, something that's really low-hanging fruit. It's not going to be a huge shift. It's not going to take me a long time to drive to get to, but that is settling in as you were talking about that, your goals. That is starting to become more and more clear in this conversation for me. So that is very helpful. I think on the other side with work, that's where there's a lot more different layers and just trying to consider, I know what I have to get done early on in this month, and I haven't been able to pursue it because with the break from school. So I know that internally tomorrow when the kids are back in school, it'll just happen. I know I need to tick off the boxes for that. So I think I want to be a little more gentler with myself and give myself a little more grace for not doing that yet, because it just wasn't maybe the time and I didn't have the attention to do it well. So, I think instead of beating myself up, which I have been doing over the past week, because I feel like I have not accomplished what I needed to accomplish, I'm feeling through this conversation that I can still have intention and goals, but I can allow a little bit more grace for myself and just realize that sometimes there are moments where I just need that break and I must take it. And so I think thinking about that is also going to be important for me in 2026. What does breaks look like, short and that sort of thing, and how are they integrated into the year? So yeah, I'll pass it back to you, LaShawn, and yeah, feel free to, go wherever you go in the conversation, but I'm also curious, like, do you have certain questions that you ask of yourself to help you create these plans, or do you have certain things you do in particular that help you stay aligned with a plan?
Yes, I do. And one of the things that I was thinking about before I answer that question, I do want to acknowledge that you are gaining wisdom from things that worked for you last year with the weight training, knowing that having that external accountability where you schedule something like a class that has to do with your health, then you can honor that. But if you schedule something that's like more um, self-motivated or something that you put on the calendar, like go for a walk or a run or something, that you can schedule over that or even not do it. But that if you have a class, you will do it. And I think honoring that and acknowledging that and seeing that that is a tool that helps you stay accountable is great. And I think that you are leveraging that and you're going back to that for 2026 for your health goals. So I did want to acknowledge that. I think that's great because often I think there can be a a battle between what we think we should do and what works. Like I
Yes.
should be able to just put on my calendar that I'm going to do, yoga or I'm going to go run or I'm going to go do it. But then there's what works, and what works for you, Eryn, is having a class. And why not? I mean, there's so many great things, so many ways to get to where you want to go. It doesn't have to be that ideal way or that way that we think we should do it or the way that we should be, but really recognizing that that is a tool that works and using it in this year's goal, to meet these year's goals, I think is a great way to give that extra support for yourself. And then you also mentioned grace and breaks and how important it is to be intentional about the breaks. So I just wanted to acknowledge those two things that came up while you were talking, Eryn. So, to answer your question, one of the things that I do anytime I'm planning something or I am designing a program or I'm doing something that requires detailed planning or defining the plan, I almost always start with, okay, what do I want to get out of this, or what is the purpose of this? So I'm asking the questions. One of the things that we do in positive intelligence coaching is one of the sage powers is navigate. And what we do in navigate is we do like a flash forward where the client visualizes talking to their wiser self, their wiser elder self, who has been through um, a, a, a challenge or who has overcome an obstacle, and the person visualized going and talking to their wiser elder self and telling their wiser elder self or asking their wiser elder self some questions. And the two questions are, what is the most important thing in this situation that I need to pay attention to? So the wiser elder self is speaking from a place of having gone through it. So there's that wisdom and that hindsight of what that is. And so the idea is that you already have the answer. And what is the most important thing? And the second thing is, what is not important? And those two questions that we have the client ask their wiser elder self are the two questions that I ask myself. What am I trying to accomplish with this goal? What am I trying to accomplish with this event? What would I like to see this year look like? And from there, I can make my plans. So those are the two like key questions that I ask myself when I am planning something. It's really important for me to know where I'm going. It gives me direction. It's my North Star. And it also prevents me from getting distracted. So you go along, you have a great plan, and then a shiny object comes up, and I have to ask myself, okay, does this shiny object align with what I want? And if it's the answer is yes, I'll go to that shiny object. If the answer is no, I might say, okay, so what is it about this shiny object that I'm so interested in? Is there something that is shifting in what I want? Is this maybe a reflect? So this shiny objects do two things for me. One, it helps me remember what I originally planned to do. And it also helps me reassess. Do I still want this? Is this attraction to this shiny object an indication that maybe I've changed along the way and do I need to adjust? Those are kind of some signposts that I use along the way as as life continues and as especially if it's a long-term goal and I'm getting closer to the end point. If things start to shift or my interest starts to kind of pivot, then I reassess. I ask, is this aligned with my goal? Is this my original goal? Do I still have this goal? Do I need to change some things? And then, so being flexible also, because we often have new information that comes in, we change. And so a goal that we had before when we started might be no longer as important. So it's important, I think, also to be flexible and be mindful of the fact that we're always changing and growing and learning and things, and life is messy. Life is messy. Things happen, for example, going back to my own personal goal for 2026. If our car breaks down or one of our kids gets injured or something happens where we have to maybe use more money than we had planned than budgeted, then that's something that I would have to shift and I would have to put a smaller amount of money away than I would if it was, everything was great, So this is like something to keep in mind. And then that goes back to giving ourselves grace. Eryn, any thoughts coming up for you?
I love your approach to reflection as a modality for not only looking backward, but also looking forward through that flash forward exercise. And I think that can be really helpful when clarifying wants and needs. And then I love that you also brought up messy. When you said messy, that really just kind of highlighted where I'm at personally, but where I also see a lot of my clients at is all of those emotions that we haven't yet touched base on, but are such a big part of this. So I'm feeling mad and sad and frustrated and all the things. I have like this huge emotional response to where I'm at right now because I can't see the path forward that I really want and need to take. And it's like, as a coach, as a professional, do we address the emotions, as kind of the root of the other pieces that fall into place with the planning? And how do we do that? And how do we help people sit with that messy and uncomfortable feeling of what is this poking at you? What is this trying to tell you? Why are you feeling so sad and mad and frustrated and all of those things? It's been really hard to find a positive emotional state around this kind of concept for me looking forward into 2026. And I can't really put my finger on as to why. I just have these big feelings. So, if I were coaching myself, I would try to better understand what those feelings are, how they are showing up in my body and in my space, and what they are telling me, and what wisdom am I gleaning from them. Maybe it's just I need to be patient. Maybe it's actually I need to push through and have a better plan. There's so many different angles to take, and I think that's what makes this type of work in coaching as well as in life so challenging, right? Because motivation and having a readiness to change there's partially an art and science to it, right? Like there's motivational interviewing as a practitioner that I've been trained in in multiple ways to help people really get at their underlying motivations for what they want to shift or change. But then there's also that whole process too of, okay, are you ready to make the change? What supports are in place to make the change? What will you do when things don't go well? It's such a process with this type of work. And I think that that is key because coaching can be a true key support for helping people, everyday people, whether it's something they want to think through about their work plans or their fitness plans or anything. The coaching modality itself can be so helpful in helping people understand where they are at and the changes they want to make, how they are feeling and thinking about those, what are their true motivations, and how do they get to that forward flash forward from the sage to that navigation piece to get there. And like, honestly, I can't coach myself on this, but I know that I'm frustrated. I know that I'm like, something's not quite feeling aligned, and I can't figure that out. And so I will use a coach and help myself with that process. But sometimes it's so hard to kind of get to not even the root, but get to something that brings in the light for like, okay, I feel good about trying this next step, or I feel good about shifting my behavior in this way, or I don't even have to feel good, but this feels aligned. Like this feels like a place to put my energy toward or move in a certain direction toward. And this takes me to the topic just generally of motivation, and coaching and motivation always go together. And it's one of the more challenging things as a coach because there's so much out there about, motivation and, how do you get motivated? And a few years ago, there's that research that said, you get motivated by starting. It's not that the motivation comes first. You actually have to start, then the motivation comes. But on the other end of that, yes, in some scenarios, but not in other scenarios. And motivation is such a personal thing because of the lived experiences that people hold, their own individuality. And it is a really hard science to kind of figure out what is going to be, most helpful for moving forward. And so I don't know, maybe that's a goal in 2026, just as a coaching topic, as talking a little bit more about motivation and how that shapes people's experiences and what shows up for them and how they want to move forward. But as I talk through all of this, it's like, yes, I need someone to do this for me because it's really hard to self-coach on these topics. It is so much easier to have an outside thought partner who can help ask questions, but also help you see what you need to see without them pushing something on you, but by giving you the space to reflect and better understand what do you have available to you and what do you want to move forward with. And so, I think for me, one of the navigation pieces right now that I'm feeling into is really trying to find a coach who can help me with that motivation piece.
Yeah, it sounds like as a coach, and I know it's like, you can't coach yourself sometimes. It's difficult to see certain things. And also having a thought partner can be a great mirror. And often when you are working with a coach, things that are really familiar that you've been looking at for weeks or months or years can suddenly shift in a way that's unexpected and surprising and could lead to breakthroughs and can lead to those epiphanies that allow us to access the wisdom of what's going on. Because sometimes we're looking at something in the same way, and no matter how we turn it or what we do with it, we're looking at it through the same lens, even though we're turning that lens around. But then someone else could come around and have a totally different lens. Like, let's say our lens is only showing us the 2D, and they have this other lens that brings us into the 3D, or, and so, or maybe we're looking at it through a magnifying glass and they show it through a microscope. There's going to be different vantage points. And there's so much value in having a thought partner and talking to someone about something that you are stuck on or that you need a little bit more clarity on, or would like a different perspective on. So I think there's a lot to be said about working with a coach and having a coach, a thought partner who can navigate and explore a situation with you, or a challenge with you. And as you were talking, Eryn, there were several things that came up, one of which was the power of stillness, the power of not moving forward. What is the wisdom that we can find in being stuck? Goes back to our reflections on our wonderful retreat that we had, and how we were in the Botanic Gardens, and there was such beauty in stasis, and there was such beauty in the quiet that comes with dormancy. And is it possible that this frustration, or this need to know, or this new need to move forward, or to all the big feelings that you're feeling? And I love that you mentioned really just sitting with those feelings and finding the wisdom in those feelings. And I also I'm curious about the wisdom of just stillness, of the wisdom of maybe not being ready. What can we find? What answers can we find in that? So that's one thing that came up while you were talking. And the other thing that came up was also the support, and like asking that question. When it comes to change, are you ready for this change? What do you need for this change? But I like the question, are you ready for this change? And I think it's really important to ask that question, because it gives you some awareness as to where you are. Are you ready? And what do you need to be ready? Or do you need to be ready? There's all these questions that you can ask, very powerful questions that were coming up in what you were saying. But those are some things that came up when you were talking. Eryn, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. I love the imagery of the Botanic Gardens. And I think for me, what I'm struggling a little bit with is the natural shift in weather. Usually it's a lot snowier, a lot colder. And here it feels like spring. And there are even some things budding that should not be, because of how unaligned the weather is with the typical weather patterns where we live. And I do think there is something there, and maybe I'm trying to kind of like rush, because I feel like it's spring in a way, whereas like that stillness, it's still winter, it's still really landing into this soft place of wisdom and understanding and being thoughtful. So I think that I have felt this. I know I have felt this with nature, but just to say it aloud, say another good reminder, like I don't need to be rushed necessarily through a certain process just because the natural world is different this time, or feels different. And so yeah, that's really showing up too. And I think that, the natural world plays a lot into our rhythms, into the way that we go about the world, partially because of how we have set up systems to mirror the natural world, and then partially just the natural world itself. So I really like you bringing that back to that dormancy at the Botanic Gardens and the plants, and letting time guide the process in a way. And I think that's the other piece, like listening to something outside of oneself, letting, like I said, time, whether that's intuition or a spiritual source or whatever it may be. I think that can be another key part to planning. And I think it's also paradoxical, because a lot of people who are planners or want clear goals feel that alignment with very self-driven possibilities. I manifest what I manifest. And on the other end of that, there's kind of more of a spiritual take, whether that's God or a higher power or something else that plays a larger role in one's life, and how that relates to the planning. And so I think it's always interesting when those two can kind of come together and kind of see what can be revealed when things are looked at, like you mentioned, from a 3D lens, from a lens outside of oneself to something much bigger, to a higher power or our own intuition or things like that. Because it is the case that is a lot of people who want these more structured goals often have that drive, and that can be really helpful, but it can also be myopic sometimes, I think. And in my own personal life, it can be myopic, and I'm not listening to the guidance that I am being provided, whether that's by ancestors or something else spiritually. So I love this idea, the juxtaposition of the natural world with the planning world and the spiritual world with the planning world, and how those two can come together simply by asking questions about nature, about a higher power, and listening and pausing. So, yeah.
Again, really great insights that you have into the process. And then also just like the curiosity that comes with having big emotions around something, or just being able to like sit with it and learn more about it. And I do think that sometimes we can put undue pressure on ourselves to perform, to produce. And this brings me to the idea of the value and the power of just being, just existing, and not having to like justify our existence or qualify our existence, just to be. What would it be to sit and receive and not be in a position where we have to produce something, or we have to go forward or perform, or just be? And I love what you said about the natural world, because it is very strange. This weather is so strange, because usually if it's like this, if there's no precipitation, it's usually pretty cold. But because it's warm and there's no precipitation, it's deceptive, because it feels like it's March or April when it's actually January. And I find myself telling myself, okay, LaShawn, it's January. It is not almost April. It is not
Yeah.
almost May. Even though it feels like we're 5 months in, we're only 5 days in. Okay, so just calm down.
Exactly.
And one of the things that I was thinking about, I had this conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about parenting, and this phrase came up, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm like, yeah, in parenting, we often don't know what we're doing. But one of the things that I questioned that. I'm like, wait a minute, is that true? I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, but if I really examine what I'm doing as a parent, I know what I'm doing. You know, I know that what I'm doing is being there for my child, protecting my child, preparing my child. I know that the things that I'm doing have purpose. So I need to stop saying I don't know what I'm doing, because it's a feeling, and feelings are not facts. They're information. And even though we feel like it's May, it's not. It's January and we're 5 days in. So take a deep breath.
Yes.
Whew, it's okay. We have time. And what would be something that we could gain from just sitting and breathing and being in nature, and maybe kind of like you said, Eryn, you notice that there are things that are budding that shouldn't be budding. And I'm just wondering, like, how is nature responding to this? Is there a sense of urgency, or are they just the natural things, the flora and fauna, just
Yeah.
going with it?
From observation, it looks like they're like humans all over the map. You got the plants that are like, let's go. And you got the other ones like, no way, I'm staying dormant. I don't know. Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah,
Really good point. So, well, I think, are we circling in on a coaching nugget of
coaching
wisdom?
does seem like that. Do you have one?
I think so. I think my main takeaway today is it's still helpful to have intention and have a plan that loosely, is aligned with both your wants and needs, but can also be consistently workshopped with a thought partner, with a coach, so that you ride kind of that wave of stuckness. And at points where that stuckness is okay, it's okay. And then at other points, you have that support of what should pivot, what should change, but what also should just continue with patience. And so that's my key takeaway from this conversation today.
Yeah. There's so much in that coaching negative wisdom. And I will add to it I'm going to go back to the stillness and the quiet. and the permission to be. What can you gain from stillness, quiet, and giving yourself permission to be? Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm LaShawn with Michelle's Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.